Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and I'm going to be making a video about a game between Emil Sutovsky and Evgeny Postny. And this is from the 2001 Israel Open Championships. And this is a round 8 match, and Postny was really pressing a 20-year-old 2400 pressing against Sutovsky, who was a pretty strong 2600 player at the time. So Sutovsky is playing white here, and Postny is playing black. And with bishop c4 and knight f6, so the two knights defense here out of the Italian game with bishop c4. And with knight g5, Sutovsky it's a pretty theoretical line. And after d5 and pawn takes, if knight takes d5, there's actually a sacrifice here called the fried liver attack with knight takes f7. And it gets to be a pretty big mess around here. So anyway, instead, after e takes d5, Postny played knight a5 here. So he's going to be sacrificing a pawn after bishop b5 check, but he's also going to be getting some pretty good compensation with the fact that white's knight on g5 is going to be misplaced, and also black is going to experience a slight lead in development. So he's really trying to play for the initiative. And so with h6, he's kind of putting the question to the knight, because if it goes back to h3, that's not going to be good with bishop takes h3. And after knight f3, e4. And so here black just gaining some more space and really trying to take the initiative even more. Also, the knight is slightly vulnerable on e5. So here Postny played bishop c5, and Sutovsky played c3. So he's trying to threaten maybe some b4 ideas, something like that. And so also c3, maybe he's preparing to play d4 as well. And so in this position, queen c7 by Postny is black. So he's trying to, let's say b4, he can just play queen takes e5. And so in a position like this, he's not going to take that pawn to open up the white dark square bishop. So going back a couple of moves, queen c7, so we're defending against b4, and so now d4. So that was Sutovsky's idea, was to reinforce the knight with d4 and maybe try to shut down the dark square bishop's diagonal. Although after en passant, so e takes d3 and knight takes d3, the knight's going to be forced back, and bishop d6 is going to make it pretty tough for white to castle because of this battery lined up at h2. And he doesn't really want to waste time playing h3 in a position like this, because his queen is so stuck in the center. He doesn't really have a good place for it. You just prefer to develop the pieces more than waste time with moves like h3. And so now bishop to f5, so definitely an attentive move. And you can see black is down a pawn, but he's got excellent compensation because his bishops are really controlling the board, and he's got a pretty substantial lead in development. So now b4 definitely makes sense, as after knight c4, white is, instead of playing h3, he figured he would just trade off black's dark square bishop. And so now rook d8 definitely makes sense to go ahead and introduce this x-ray against white's queen. And bishop to e3. So bishop e3 now is going to be lining up on that a7 pawn in response to rook d8 by black. And so, moves like a5 is not going to work, just bishop to b6. And it's just too much material for white. So instead, Postny just castles. And I've got to think most of this game was preparation here. And so castles, bishop takes, and now knight d5. So a very nice move. Now he's down 2 pawns, but you can see white's king's really stuck in the center. And black has excellent centralization. So his only piece that's out of the game is the knight on b7. And so here, Sutovsky, bishop to d4. So he's trying to defend this pawn and kind of regroup his bishop and centralize his pieces a little bit to defend. Postny just responded with rook e8, so definitely a logical move. And almost every single one of his pieces is just perfectly centralized and coordinated and attacking the white position. So even though he's down 2 pawns, he's got a lot of compensation with his centralization and control of the central files and pressure on d3 and on d4. So white could finally castle because he didn't have to worry about the h2 pawn. But knight to b5, and black has got a pretty nice bind and on the white position, and a lot of threats involving knight takes c3 and hitting the bishop on e2. So after rook c1, it's kind of sketch. Knight takes c3, and now here Sutovsky blundered. He could have played bishop takes, and then I think maybe knight to f4, knight takes, and after rook takes d1, in this position I think black has got a small edge. I mean, probably kind of drawish, but I think he's got a slight advantage here. And so maybe after bishop d1, just because of the back rank of white and the weak pawn, let's say a variation like this, and a bishop here, maybe something like bishop c2, and it's pretty sketchy for white. It's definitely pretty uncomfortable. So going back, so instead of that, he played knight takes and rook takes here, which turned out to just lose the game on the spot, because after knight takes, and here's simple tactic, rook takes e2, I think Sutovsky might have been in time pressure here with white, because here he had probably calculated that he can just move the rook to d1 because he's buying time with the mate threat. But after f5, just entering a hopelessly lost endgame. Queen d7, so definitely Postny is playing pretty actively here with queen d7. And in this position, black can't quite take the bishop, so he just played rook a8, and Sutovsky resigned because he has no defense, no way to defend the a pawn, and black is definitely going to get some kind of mate coming up. So definitely a very nice game by the 20-year-old Evgeny Postny, and this is Will Stewart from OnlineChessLessons.net, and thanks for tuning in.